Hello, this is Jon Speelman with a video version of my latest fortnightly column in ChessBase, and I've called it Do Pawns Disregard Einstein, which is a bit of a silly title because they obviously don't. But a fortnight ago I did a column on avalanches, pawn avalanches, and readers kindly suggested a few more positions and I thought I'd use them. And while I was thinking about this, I thought about how a pawn is promoted and its energy from going up the board is transformed into mass, into either a knight or a queen. And I thought this is terribly un-Einsteinian, because if you take the Einstein equation, the most famous one, E equals mc squared, then m equals e over c squared. And so you need an unbelievable amount of energy to increase the mass of a pawn by so much. Anyway, it's just a very silly thing. Because in fusion, that's what happens, isn't it? You get a bit more mass through the energy. Obviously pawns don't disregard Einstein because it's a fancy, but it's just a thought. And I was talking about auto-promotion as well. I watch blitz games sometimes fairly randomly. And there was somebody who had to under promote to a knight and nearly lost on time, nearly got flagged doing so, because of course everybody has auto promote on. And I said I don't, because I don't play bullet, because I'm not quick enough with the mouse. I can see the moves, I just can't bloody well play them. Anyway, there we are. So what I've got a few more examples of this. I've got a famous game by Einstein against Robert Oppenheimer, the head of the Manhattan Project, of course. And I've also, just at the end, one of the games from the Norway tournament, people have done it before. Carlsen, the game he lost to Karyakin, he tried to set up a fortress. And the interesting thing about this is that when pawns do promote, you shouldn't immediately stop the variation when pawn equals queen happens, but think about whether anything can happen afterwards. Okay, well, I'm going to go now. I'm just going to check that I am recording. And I am, which is very good. And then I'm going to go to here, to my ChessBase, and I've moved this column, number 154, to the bottom, so it's there. And we've got 6 games, which I'm not going to look at in huge detail. I'm just interested really in the avalanches. So this is a game, Smyslav Botvinnik, from the absolute USSR Championship in 1941. I think that's the one that they had because they had the wrong result in 1940. I.e. Botvinnik didn't win. Or was it in 41 that he didn't win? Anyway, he didn't win the tournament, so they had to have an absolute championship, as I understand it. Which is a bit Soviet, isn't it? Anyway, this is an interesting game. I'm going to go through very quickly. It doesn't look unmodern today, does it? It's quite similar to the sort of stuff they have. Clearly it's just a position. They're just playing chess and moving their pieces around. Bishop g5 is quite useful because getting rid of the dark squared bishops is certainly something you might want to do. And he actually got rid of it, and now he's got quite a lot of space, black, which is nice. I mean, I assume it's not better yet, but later it became better. Black has the D line, but it doesn't really matter at the moment. And Smyslav was pressing, clearly. Once the white squared bishops get exchanged, and it's getting a little bit, well, they didn't. It would have been getting a bit difficult for white, because once the white squared bishops are exchanged, you have some entry squares. And they played some more moves. I think that was quite clever, getting a d4 square. And now if he takes on f4, I think something very bad happens. Yeah, that causes a major incident, because suddenly there's no way to protect everybody, because the bishop just doesn't have a square. If bishop e2, you just take it. And so that actually wins a piece. And they played some more moves. And the interesting thing, apparently rook g1 would have been okay here. But they got to this position. I don't particularly know about that move. It's presumably just trying to get the rook out. Now it gets very, very sharp because there are pawns all over the place. That's to get the pawn advanced. And apparently in this position rook b2 would have been okay. And once you can, if you can give up a piece for pawns as good as that, you do. Of course you can't play rook a5 because the bishop takes knight and rook takes bishop. And apparently this is playable-ish for white. I mean, it obviously is playable-ish, whether hard to assess without thinking about it, which I'm not really doing. What I am doing, I'm reaching this position, and this is the position where we started. I was sent this diagram by a reader, for which many thanks. And basically, so black has the 3 connected passed pawns, white has 2. Black can't do anything but advance. And this avalanche, if the rook wasn't an e1, I don't know, would it have been different? It probably would. But there's a tempo on it there. He went rook to there anyway. If rook checks, king to there, a7, d2. Yeah, of course there is. Rook to there, pawn to there, rook to there, pawn equals queen. And, well, best you can do is to play pawn equals queen. But now queen takes rook wins quite easily. If you go to the back rank, there's pawn equals queen and rook takes queen. Well, obviously, you can probably just win by, I don't know, playing a few moves to stop it being perpetual check and then winning. But in fact, what happens, and here you can play queen takes rook or pawn equals queen. They all win. So none of this happened, and that's a good move, defending the second rank. And here you mustn't play pawn to the 7th. You have to be very accurate in races like this, but you play pawn equals queen exclam. I don't know, does, presumably b1 equals queen also works, does it? b1 equals queen also works, yeah. That's very obvious. Because what you mustn't do is to go c2. And this is just a draw. You'd better not go rook c7 because of rook checks and rook g6 mate, which would be a bit sad. So c2 would have been a blunder, but by playing d1 he deflected the rook to the square where the pawn is queening. Obviously now you win. So very interesting finish from Botvinnik, and you had these pawns stomping around. That's the first one. Second game, another one sent to me by readers, again won by Fier in American Continental Championship in Brazil and in Sao Paulo. And again, I'm not so interested in the game. I mean, it's just a game, isn't it? Black's got some sort of King's Indian-y position. White's vaguely doing stuff on the king's side, though why? I suppose that's where you play if you're black in the King's Indian, but he's got this queen and bishop stomping around. It's all slightly odd, I'd say. Anyway, they played these moves, and I don't know if you should have played bishop takes bishop first and then on this. What does the engine think? I assume not. It's going to maybe put in. Doesn't want to do this actually. Thinks this is. Yeah, I mean, I think this is quite sensible as well. And rook c8 or something. I think there's no particular reason to leave the bishops on. It's not much of a variation, but it has changed the PGN slightly. They got this position. The queen is not very well on h4. She really isn't. That's a bit sad. I don't know if you have to take that. I don't know if otherwise g4 is happening. f4 rather than g5 and things. But what happens is that black now gets a big mass of pawns. And he just about manages to stay alive. Can you take on e4 or do you just lose for some reason? I haven't seen... take knight takes queen f3 check, of course, sorry. So you don't go takes and queen f2, you go queen f3 check. Okay. So if you go takes, question mark, takes, Knight takes, queen to there, check. Okay, so they got to some position. F4 is trying to block, and he actually played the excellent move E3, but in fact if you just take and go rook E3, you've got a clear advantage, nice advantage. So he didn't need to do this, but, and I suppose that's really better in some ways, but it wouldn't have fitted in with our theme. So that threatens in a moment to go bishop F8 to trap the queen. Let's see, 4. So now rook H7 is definitely a threat. Okay, I suppose I ought to say threatening rook H7. Okay. Very obvious. Queen H4. He could actually go H4, F4, knight E5. And apparently he would draw this, according to the great engines themselves. It says that this is a draw, which is not at all obvious, or F2 looks like a more obvious move. Knight takes that. But this is also a draw apparently. Here, King G7 takes, and okay, takes, check, and this is a draw, is it? Okay, I mean these lines, again, we're going to get to our normal beautiful position. In fact, this happened. And these pawns, they're so strong that White's plan basically is to try to give up the knight for them. And it's at least equal for black. King to there is a blunder, after which White's losing. Engines say that this is playable, because this way you've got some pressure against the pawns. And claims this is equal, which isn't obvious. I think rook e1 is the most natural move here, actually. Let's promote rook e1. Rook to there. You can give check as well. You can just make a draw. Okay. Also, to there. And basically it should be enough, but not more. White's in place to go up the knight, and there's some funny line where you actually, sorry, I suppose I could change my also. Yeah, that's what should have happened. But after King F1, it was just lost. That's just, I mean, he's just putting his king into mortal danger. I suppose he thought, I don't know, maybe he thought this mattered, but of course it doesn't at all. Obviously, if knight takes rook F3, clearly. I suppose we might as well do this. Knight takes rook F3, G1, G3 is the same. And he won. I mean, the pawn stomped through. Obviously now you're threatening F2 check, G2 check, pawn takes rook, pawn equals queen check, and you're going to take the house, the garden, and everything else. So he resigned. By the way, if he moves, yeah, well, anyway, you're winning everything. So that was a nice game, a nice triad of pawns. Then I've got 3 more games. I've got the famous game Guffeld-Cavalac. Famous game, they were both in their 20s, both now dead sadly of course, in some match between Russia under 26 and the Czech Republic, or Czechoslovakia as it was then, under 26 in 1962, so at least before the Prague Spring, before it got really hairy between the countries. Okay, and Cavalac played this nice move F5. Apparently bishop c6 and knight e5 is good. That was the main line. You certainly don't do that. You'd look incredibly stupid. So you went knight e3, sorry, threatening the knight. Knight back. Queen h4, queen f3. Knight f6 is a fine move. I think knight c7, d6 gives some edge, maybe. And so what's happened, and I think you can just go bishop e3 actually and just play this position. It's a bad equal. But Gufeld wanted his material and he went king d1, which is actually a mistake. King f1 is apparently better. It's difficult, of course. You certainly don't take on c6 because at the end of it you're going to get splatted. So you go, yeah. That's checkmate, or bishop a6 is mate. I mean, obviously not. So dc6, bishop b2, rook g8, queen h5 check. And this is a much better version. This, I think, is this sort of playable. This is still a bit better. I think with the king and f1 stopping the pawn, it's playable. With the king and d1 it isn't, because the pawn's running. Obviously, again, bishop c6 is ridiculous. So they got the queens off, but this pawn is very much alive and kicking an f2. And it makes life really hard for white. b3, bishop f3, bishop f5, knight e2, rook a d8. He can't really move any pieces. It's horrible, you know, because you're going to get an e4, and once you get an e4, then you're going to win at least a piece back, probably more. I think rook g2 is good as well in this position. Does he take? Apparently so. And he's a move too slow to get organised. And this should be winning as well. Then if you could try knight e4 here and then rook f2. I suppose you would, wouldn't you? But you're going to be pretty much... You're going to be in deep trouble at the end of it. I mean, knight e4 is the best you can do. I would say, I presume the engine says the same, but it says minus plus. Rook f2, yeah, okay, rook f2, bishop f2, knight e4, I don't know, bishop e4 will win. Bishop e4, king f2, rook checks or something, I mean. Okay, you're 2 or 3 pawns up with the initiative. Actually going to be 3, aren't you? Okay, so that's not. So he took it. And now the nice thing about this game is how Cavalier kept on giving up the exchange just to stop, to break the blockade. That's a nice move. I think e4 is also good. I mean, basically, so bishop f8 prepares to go b4 and bishop c5. But Cavalier played this beautiful move rook to there. I think you don't need to, actually. I think you can play king f5, bishop c5. Yeah, I mean, I think we said e3 check. I mean, basically you're winning anyway. And you win. I mean, you win. I mean, you can go d3 as well, actually, which I didn't notice somehow. King d3, king f5, bishop c5 is the best you can do, is it? Can you do? If c4... rook g8, it says it's c4. And the basic problem white has is that he's just going to lose. I mean, eventually. Yeah, it's just going to be lost. c5 takes. Now the question only is, do you recapture? I think you recapture. Just do that. I mean, why not? Because the pawns are going to land. Can you go rook d1 now? Try this. Sorry. Check, king e2. Oh God, that's horrible, isn't it? King e2, king e4 is glad. I hadn't noticed he could do that. Leaving the rook on prise as well, because the pawn stomps through. That's quite pretty, isn't it? So he could have done that, but in fact he went rook g5, bishop to there was the idea. And he took it. And I mean, rook takes pawn is hopeless. Now, I made a point here about passed pawns and bishops and rooks. When you've got a real hoard, then bishops support the pawns better because they can easily control the diagonal squares. In order to support f3 without allowing king e3, you need a black rook on d3. The black bishop, which is, you know, a very specific square, the black bishop just needs to be on that diagonal and stops that. Also, equally, when you're defending against passed pawns, that a bishop and a diagonal can sometimes blockade a great horde of pawns. And there are positions sort of with pawns in f6, e5, d4, c3 and b2, and a white bishop in b1 and a white king in f7. Black has a black squared bishop and it's completely drawn because there's nothing you can do. So I'm saying, I'll stick this in, sorry, Control R. So we'll just make a bishop blockade, clear board. How do I clear board, being stupid. Here we go. So I could just press S again as well, couldn't I? So what I'm saying is, bishop there. I'm not even going to save this actually, there's no point. And we'll give black a couple of dark squared bishops and this is just completely drawn. Because there's nothing to do, because the bishop stops all the pawns and now there's nothing to do. Okay, I'm not going to save that. But that's the point, that you can save with that diagonal motion, whereas a rook can't possibly stop the passed pawns because of the way the pawns move, because they're captured diagonally. So he got an f3, and there was nothing to do. I mean, you can play rook takes pawn, but it's not going to help you. Black is going to be able to... Well, the white king can't get to f1, so you can just slowly create a passed pawn on the queen side, move the king away, and then bring your king to e2. So he tried this one, actually. I should say takes... I should say this takes, Control A is also totally lost. Black creates a passed pawn on the queen side to distract white king, arranges to play king e2, and in fact king e2 or king g2. It's not going to be difficult. Right, okay. So what happened was he got his king there. Rook takes pawn, there's nothing better. And he resigned. So a very pretty game in which this horde of pawns was supported superbly by the bishop. And at one point, actually, black was 2 exchanges down. But given the amount of firepower he had those pawns, it didn't matter at all. I've got 3 more games. I've got a Kasparov-Karpov, which was annotated by Harry Schussler at some point, Swedish guy. Again, I'm not really... Which one is it? Is it from one of the World Championship matches? One of the many, many World Championship matches where Karpov had found it's the Zaitsev or Lopez. And Karpov played Queen B2, which is quite clever. And this basically gives black more pieces than white. Key 6. And so at this point black has many, many extra pawns, but white has some white squares. Presumably, if I ask an engine, it's going to say it's much better for black at the moment. And it says winning or much better. But Kasparov actually, when practice, this horde is, this avalanche is only nascent really. And what happened was that while he was advancing all his boys, he managed to make enough trouble. He took now, I don't know if is d4 removed now, I'm assuming that not these things. Well, how is d4 in this position? d4 you take a lot of times, and after d3 you have enough checks really. So they played some moves, and in the end he survived. And there were even some moments when, if it had gone wrong, then Kasparov might have swindled him and won. So this avalanche, you look at this avalanche, and you know it's there. The snow is heavy on the ground. Is that how an avalanche? I suppose. But it hasn't started rumbling yet. Then because I was talking about Einstein, I gave a famous game in which he beat Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb, of course, in inverted commas, in some game in, where was it? It was Princeton. So it was in Princeton before they went to St. Alamo. A long time before then. And a4, sorry, is a bad move because actually bishop c5 would have counterattacked and given black the advantage. But what happened was they played these moves. I don't know, is bishop e6 a better move? It probably is, isn't it? Or is there something? Bishop e6 is a better move, yeah. Okay. But what actually happened was that Einstein took a lot of his pieces. King f7 is better, but after check here. White's obviously winning. And, I mean, there's some interest. Okay, it's Einstein playing chess. As I said, I think Einstein was supposed to have been about a 150 player in British terms. So about 1800 or something. And obviously he devoted 0 time to chess. But he was a very, very, very clever man. That's the cleverest, one of the cleverest men in history. And so he could play chess. You know, not important at all. This is a nice move. This is the nicest move of the game. Smashing open the line. He could have played knight e4, I think, as well, actually. And around about here, Oppenheimer resigned. A far from wonderful game. It was interesting that Einstein... Oh, and I misspelt him. I've given him a double E, which seems a bit rude, doesn't it? Einstein saw the line opening pseudo-sacrifice. Knight c4, which forced resignation. Okay, and finally, the last one is just this game from Norway, the Norway tournament. I put some annotations in. I put whatever I stuck in for myself, really. And what I wanted to do, at the end, after much fighting, they reached... they got to this position where white has this horde. Black is trying to give perpetual check, or in a very good case, mate. And after some hacking, Carlsen tried this. And he won the bishop. Obviously, you don't get king g4 because you get mated in 2 moves, which would have been a bit sad for the man. And now, the question is which pawn to advance. And Karyakin, of course, got this right. If you advance the c pawn, then after rook c7, rook takes pawn, pawn equals queen, rook takes b5, the rook is in the 5th rank. And it seems that this is then a draw. And we'll come to that in a moment. So he pushed. So the important point is that you have to go beyond pawn equals queen and make sure everything works. And here he's threatened to go rook takes pawn and rook c5, but h5 broke up the king side, and then it was easy. And he actually resigned here. And I gave a sample variation, which is not very interesting. Check here, here, here. That's an A sample variation. Now the interesting question is whether this is a blockade or not. And I believe it is. There are 6 squares on the 6th rank. a5, b5, c5, d5, f5 and h5. On f5 and h5 you have to watch out for queen takes rook going to a winning pawn ending. But it's easier said than done, especially queen takes f5. You're going to have to be quite close to... Well, you're going to have to be quite close to the centre anyway for the king. If you can go queen takes rook and king f5 or something, you're going to win. But not otherwise. And I gave some suggestions. I can't read it like this. I'm going to put it in. One of them was King g4, queen d3 v king g7. And the other, so let's, S. One was king g4, queen d3 v king g7, rook h5. And then you have no rook moves at all. I think rook h6 actually does draw. And the reason is that after queen checks, king f8, you can't go king g5, rook checks, king f6, rook f5 mate. And if you go f5, pawn takes pawn, king takes pawn, that's also a fortress with the f7 pawn against an h pawn, though it's much harder to play. But you just play king g8. That was one fortress. And the other one I suggested was king g4, queen c8 v king g7, rook h. King g4. Where are we? Sorry. King g4, queen c8 v king g7, rook h5. Yeah. In that case, you've got rook d5 or b5. Oh, also when I showed it to somebody, to John Cox, he said, what about the king there? That's quite clever. And there is a position, you don't want the queen on e4 because then f5 check wins. Sorry, the queen on g4, excuse me, the queen there and the king somewhere. You can be here, for instance. And in this position, because the queen can't go back to c3, you can just play king g8 here. If the king was somewhere else, well, if the king was in c6, you'd probably be winning, but that's not the point. If the king gets through, then you've broken the blockade. But here the move king g8 definitely draws. I don't know if anything else does. Probably king f8 as well, actually. So basically, it doesn't seem that there is any way to break this blockade. And the important point was that when you are promoting pawns, you have to go one move further than just the promotion, or at least you should think about it. What's happened now? I've got a queen. I know I've produced this fusion trick, but I still have to think about whether at the end of the promotion something bad happens. And sometimes you get mated. Sometimes they can do something clever with their pieces. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed this. All these avalanches. Next week we'll move on to something else, I guess. In a fortnight, I'm not sure what that'll be. The next column, today is the 18th, so a fortnight will be it'll be the 2nd of October. I'll be doing it on, which is my birthday actually, but I'll be doing it for the 3rd. This is for the 19th, and the 3rd will be Sunday the 3rd of October. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed it, and see you in a fortnight's time.